Det Yahuds. Hello all. Hashugadistin. Thank you for joining us today at the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network information session titled Elevating Ancestral Practices, a Tribal Wellness and Climate Adaptation Planning Summary. We are happy you're here today. Melinda Chase Ezra, Gitran Chag Histan. I'm Melinda Chase. I'm from the village of Anvik. I work as the tribal liaison at the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center, and I'm here with a team of people that's helping to support this, this webinar session. And we are really thrilled to be on the traditional and we're on Troth Yida Hill campus, also named by Chief Peter John, and is now the official name for the campus. And we're just really excited to be with you today to share this summary of a training that we had back in August. And we have some great presenters today. You want to go to the next slide? And our presenters include Laverne Dementa and Shasta Gowan. Laverne is a professor here of social work at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and Shasta works a couple of different programs, the environmental program and the historic preservation program at the Pala Indian tribe out of California. And Mita DeWitt, who is another dynamic woman, unfortunately had another commitment today and she's unable to join us, but she made a recording that will be available for you to view. And then also with us is Megan Pitas. She is our Alaska Fellow, and she helped to pull together much of this summary information as she came on in support of really the training that took place. And so we are just really happy to collectively welcome you today. And I just want you to feel free to, as I said earlier, introduce yourself in the chat, and also know that we will get into some questions and answers later, hopefully a little bit of discussion. So I would like to just jump in. Can you go to the next slide? So just to give you a little bit of overview of this session, or excuse me, this training and the background of this. And can I ask folks who, if you can put yourself on mute, that would be great. If you're on the phone, I believe, Mike, do you know, is that *6 or?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So I just ask if you can mute yourself, that would help everybody to hear. Thank you. So really, just to give you a little bit of background of this training that took place back in August, it was really a training that grew out of a desire to raise the dialogue and explore the intentional inclusion of our ancestral and traditional practices in adaptation planning. And it was really to link those practices and our stories and our beliefs in an effort to maintain and strengthen our resilience, especially as we are facing, ongoing impacts from climate, increasing extreme weather, and many challenges. We've had a pretty challenging time the last 6 years. We've had some really notable events in terms of extreme events across the state. We had a 2015 really heavy fire season, record highs, also a marine heat wave, and much coastal flooding. And this is just something that all of you know is increasing and is expected to increase. And with that, we have, our communities are experiencing a great deal of both emotion and response, and we have a lot of strength as communities. So an intention of this was really to provide that space to explore it more. And it grew out of a project, the Building Resilience Today project that we did in 2019 and 2020. In both of these projects, our key partner was the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association, who provided the funding and much of the support in carrying out these two trainings that got a lot of interest. But in that early BRT training, Building Resilience Today, we had a presentation on trauma and resilience, and how do we, as Indigenous people across Alaska, with a fairly recent contact history in a lot of social change over the last 200 years or 150 years, look at now climate impacts when we're still often dealing with a lot of historical or current trauma. So that we got feedback from that training, and it really highlighted the desire for our tribes and people to explore this issue of integrating our traditional practices intentionally in adaptation planning. And so we put out a training call, recruitment, and within 1 week we got actually more than 24 applicants, and we were able to accept many of the communities. And of course, this was a face-to-face here are the communities that were able to attend, and we just really had a packed 2 days. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Shasta.
Thanks, Melinda.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't it supposed to be Megan next?
Yes, sorry about that.
All good, no worries. So I am Megan Pitas, and I want to introduce myself a little. So I'm originally from Maryland, on the traditional homelands of the Piscataway people. And as Melinda mentioned, I am an Alaska Fellow with the Learning Network here in Fairbanks. And my academic background is kind of more broadly in psychology and international relations, which has actually been extremely helpful for this project. So kind of why I'm talking to you today is because I did help compile a lot of the materials from this training in August into a summary and full report. So those documents detail a lot of the information and resources that were shared. And the summary is actually available now, right now, walk, don't run, on our website, and the full report with examples and resources will be coming soon. It just needs a little bit more polishing. So what we have listed here is all the broader topics, titles, and themes of this training kind of as a whole. So one of the most popular sessions was mapping observations of change and feelings, which helped participants recognize feelings of anxiety and worry around the changing land, and how these feelings may impact decision-making, connection, and collaboration in climate adaptation planning. I'll leave the rest up to Melinda, as she's going to be elaborating a little bit more on that here in a minute. And these next 3 bullets are topics Shasta, Laverne, and Mita will be going over today. They're going to be talking about how wellness, health, climate, and community adaptation all overlap and connects, and how you can incorporate wellness in your adaptation plans. Down here at the bottom, one of the other popular sessions was called Climate Projections, What's Happening in Alaska in the Arctic, where research ecologist Jeremy Liddell provided information on what projections are, how the climate is changing, and how projections can be used in community planning and decision making. And with that, now I will hand it over to Shasta.
All right. Thank you, Megan. And I think that what we're going to talk about here, the feelings about change, was really, really powerful for all of our participants. And, I can say it was certainly powerful for me. So my name is Shasta Gaughan. I am the environmental director and the tribal historic preservation officer for the Paula Band of Mission Indians in Payom-Cowichan territory. That's also known as San Diego in California. And I will say this opportunity to talk about our feelings was powerful for me because I was able to hear about the experiences of the folks in Alaska and compare and contrast that with what I know from not only working for a tribe, but being a person who has lived in California for pretty much my entire life, except for college. And what we found was that people talk about wanting to share experiences with other people. They want to know what's going on in other communities. And I think in a lot of ways, people want to know that they don't feel that they're not alone. So if you look at some of these words that came up when we asked people to reflect on what they were feeling, we have these words like sadness and numb, scared and devastated. But we also have inspired and eager to protect and exhilarating. So I think what's exhilarating for people is that opportunity to connect with one another and to realize that there is a network of support, that none of us are alone in what's happening here. Now, this was harder for some people than for others to share about what they were feeling and what they are going through. And so one of the ways that we facilitated this was not just writing down the words, but giving people an opportunity to draw an actual picture of something that has changed in their community or something that concerns them about climate change in their communities. And so, for me, as somebody from Southern California, my picture was of wildfire. We have wildfire just on a regular basis in California, and it's becoming worse. And that is a direct impact of climate change. But our participants were all from Alaska. And so we had a lot of overlap in what people were experiencing. And then we put all the pictures up and were able to walk through the room and see what other people had put on their pictures. And I think for some people, it was easier to draw that picture than it was to talk about their feelings of loss and talk about the things that they've seen change. And I can speak for myself in saying that that was a very, very moving experience to see people's pictures. And then when we talked about our pictures, to hear people's stories, because some of them were incredibly, in fact, all of them, I think, were incredibly inspiring about how what they had drawn related to why they were in the room, which was to find out what they could do. In what ways could they help their communities overcome and adapt to the impacts of climate change? So next slide, please. And so that's one of the reasons that I was in the room. Melinda had invited me because I work on an initiative funded by the BIA called the Tribal Climate Health Project. That's one of my main duties in my role as Paula's environmental director, is to adapt the community to climate change. But we found that the lessons that we learned here in Paula were things that could be shared with other tribal and indigenous communities throughout the United States. And so we developed the Tribal Climate Health Project in order to provide a place for people to go for resources and to help them with their own vulnerability assessments and climate adaptation plans. And we focused very specifically on climate change, health, and wellness. Because what we found, and when I say we, I'm talking about Angie Hacker of Prosper Sustainably. She's a consultant, and she's the co-president of that small consulting firm, but really has been my equal partner in this work. And what we saw was that a lot of folks are not including the health piece in their climate vulnerability assessments and their adaptation plans. Because for most people, when they hear climate change, what they think is, things that you're experiencing there in Alaska, things like ice melt and sea level rise. For me in California, it's heat and drought and wildfire, and those are environmental impacts. But what are the environmental impacts? How are they connected to health vulnerability? So I came to this training in Alaska so I could give people some insights into what some of the connections are between certain health outcomes and how climate change is affecting health. So an example of that is that as the climate warms, there is movement of plants and animals from their usual habitats into new areas. And that can include things like animals that carry potential disease, such as mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are vectors for diseases like dengue fever and malaria. And so those are going into places where maybe they didn't used to be. Or ticks is another example. In Alaska, the melting of the permafrost may well be, providing access to unknown pathogens that have been buried for a long time, and the thawing of that permafrost is making those pathogens available. Have access to the rest of the world now. So that's a health vulnerability. As things get warmer, if you're not used to the warmer weather, then that can have an effect on things like respiratory diseases like asthma is an example. Heat and ozone are implicated in air pollution, which is implicated in respiratory illness. So there are many, many different ways in which health is connected directly to climate change and vice versa. But there are adaptation strategies that you can use to help protect your communities and plan for the potential health impacts of climate change. So during the training, I shared with the group Paula's vulnerability assessment that included everything, not just health, but we definitely made sure that we had that health part of it in there because that's usually missing from a vulnerability assessment. And then from the vulnerability assessment, we were able to dial down to the specific impacts that were the most important and put those into our adaptation plan so that we could plan for things like the fact that oak trees, which are an important source of traditional food for a lot of California Indian peoples and definitely for Paula because they produce acorns. How are we going to protect the oak trees so that people can still collect the acorns, which they use to make foods for important traditional and, rite of passage type events like, birthdays and marriages and of course, funerals as well. So we have to protect those oak trees because if the oak trees are unable to produce acorns, then the people can't gather them and engage in that traditional practice. And that has a really significant effect on people's mental and their emotional, spiritual, and cultural health. And then that in turn affects to our mental health, have an effect on our physical health. So all of these things are connected. And my goal in the training was to provide people with an outline, introduce them to the Tribal Climate Health Project website, which I will put in the chat, and let people know that there are ways to integrate these health issues, especially the spiritual, social, and cultural health and how they're connected to emotional health and how that is all connected to the places where people live, the places where history resides, and the places that are the stories. So in doing that, I was hopeful that I was able to give people some direction on what they could do to protect their communities. And doing that, it really tied in with what both Laverne and Mita were there to present as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Laverne so she can talk about her piece in the training.
Good day, Shasta. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Dea Hoods. Hello, everyone. Haleg Se'ezret. So my name is Laverne Dementif, or you can call me Haleg, which means springtime. My family is originally from the area of Holy Cross and Anvik in Southwest Alaska. And I currently live in Fairbanks and work as an associate professor of social work at UAF on the Trothieta campus. And the research, teaching, and practice work I do focuses on wellness and resilience and healing with individuals, groups, organizations, and communities. So I'm so happy to be here with you all. So I actually initially got connected with the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network after Melinda reached out to me and asked if I would present on trauma and wellness in a training on climate adaptation that they were putting on about 1.5 years ago. And I agreed, and I shared a presentation that I call Planting the Seeds, the Influence of Culture on Resilience, Hope, and Wellness. And so the trauma and wellness component actually emerged as something tribes and communities doing climate adaptation and resilience work wanted more information and support around to be able to include that in their planning efforts. What I was and still am interested in exploring and sharing is how unresolved trauma and stress impact our ability to be in relationship, impact our collective well-being, and impact our decision-making abilities at the community level. Super interested in exploring that and working with others on that. I'm also interested in having more dialogues about how our cultural and traditional practices act as a protective factor to support our resilience, healing, and wellness. So as you know, and as you've heard, climate change definitely adds another layer of grief and stress for individuals and communities in multiple and complex ways. And as you also know, Indigenous people and communities are strong and resilient and have cultural and traditional wisdom to guide them in doing healing and wellness work. So for example, culture and language revitalization has been happening on multiple fronts because we know the power of utilizing our cultural and traditional practices for wellness, balance, connection, and healing. I truly believe that awareness and understanding of how trauma impacts our mind and our body and our spirit can actually help to release guilt or shame or fear and empower us to be more compassionate with ourselves and also with others, as well as support us to do the challenging work that we're faced with in a good way. So one of the things that I talked about in the training, and I talk about this in a lot of my trainings, is really the power of our culture on our well-being. And my language mentor, the late Jim Dementi, once told me that wellness is how we live our lives. And I always reflect on this statement because I feel like it's super profound and also really simple, right? We live our lives day to day in a cultural way with the seasons, connected to nature, in relationship with spirit, eating traditional foods, and so on. And this and so much more is wellness. And examples of resilience and wellness are rooted in all cultures across Alaska and across the world. So many cultural and traditional practices incorporate healing and wellness strategies at the highest levels. I really, really love talking about and thinking about, reflecting and thinking about our traditional practices and just how much strength exists in those. There are our values, there's reciprocity, there's our connection to the environment. It's about roles and responsibility for others. It's about sharing and caring and love. And so there's so much in there to be utilized for our healing and wellness. When we think about challenges we face as human beings, whether it's depression or anxiety or addiction or climate change, a lot of this can really create a lot of disconnection. It can create a disconnection to ourselves, to family, to spirit, to land, to friends, partners, culture, and identity. So, creating connection or reconnecting and getting back into relationship can really help with that healing and moving forward. So I just wanted to, traditional Indigenous practices and ceremonies, including a variety of coping mechanisms, they include a variety of coping mechanisms and ways to connect, ways to get back into balance. So, cultural practices often teach about safety. Our elders model love, compassion, and forgiveness. Cultural practices include ways to self-regulate our bodies and co-regulate with others. Drumming and dancing and singing together is a form of co-regulation, emotional regulation. Healthy regulation actually starts again with our relationships. So elders often teach us the importance of relationships, again, to people, land, animals, nature, and spirit. So some of the important lessons that I've learned from elders across Alaska, I've actually put into a framework I call the 5 C's, which I also shared at that training. And I utilize these 5 C's in so many areas. I utilize them at UAF, in my classes, in meetings, in my life. And this is how I think about the 5 C's. When we learn about how trauma impacts our minds and bodies, we're more compassionate with ourselves and others. When we're curious about what causes pain and grief, we can help to create connection and ceremony for healing, right? And healing happens when we are in our bodies and in relationship to others in our community. So to discuss these 5 C's a little bit further and just very briefly, I'll just start with compassion. So, Indigenous elders model unconditional love, again, like I mentioned, for people in the earth, right? That's a lot of my elders have modeled that for me growing up. When the impacts of trauma on the brain, body, and behavior are understood, we're actually able to have more compassion and patience, which builds the relationships, it builds a sense of safety. And also, cultivating love and acceptance for ourselves, which has been a lifelong journey for me, really allows us to express love and acceptance for others. And love belongs in all environments. So there's so much about compassion that I think is important in our work. So the next one is connection, right? And so again, healing happens when we are in our bodies and in relationship to others. Cultural practices within Indigenous communities really, again, like I said, often incorporate connection at the highest levels. It's so brilliantly constructed if you look at them. And they, it's connection to spirit, land, people, and so on. And connection is built often into the fabric of the community, creating a foundation of strength and a collective safety net. The third one is community. Community is essential. So many elders share examples of how Alaskan communities have come together for celebration and in times of hardship, to go berry picking, to go fishing, to go to fish camp, to go move from season to season, right? So this is how we've survived and thrived together as a collective. So community is super important. The 4th C is curiosity. Elders teach us to observe the world around us and really to be open to signs in the world, right? In the environment, in nature, that help to guide us in our life and work. So we have to be critical thinkers and explorers as we work towards healing and wellness with individuals and communities and with each other. And then the 5th C is ceremony, and ceremony creates that connection to the higher power, to spirit, ancestors, and each other, and helps to bring us and our communities back into balance. So, there are diverse examples of these 5 C's in all communities and cultures. This framework can really help us to reflect on elder and community wisdom and be intentional in our strategies, right? So that we can do good work together. So that's a little bit of what I shared. Thank you so much for letting me share a little bit of that today. I'm so glad communities are incorporating trauma-informed and healing-centered wellness strategies into their climate adaptation plans to help them do the work that they're doing. And I'm really interested in continuing to support communities in this work. So next slide. As you heard, Mita DeWitt is not able to be with us today. But we were so happy that she was at the initial training with us. She's a Tlingit traditional healer and an ethno-herbalist. And she really helped to ground us in so many ways. And that's a picture of her right there, smudging and right before we got started so that we could start off in a good way. So Mita connected Indigenous story and ancestral experience of climate change and adaptation with moving out of anxiety into action. And she says, we've done this before, right? Action over anxiety. And what I found that so brilliant because, you know, as we've grown up, our elders often teach us that when we're worried or stressed, to do something, right? To work with our hands, to clean, to get out in nature, and so on, right? That's the part of the process of helping release the anxiety so that it doesn't get built up or stuck in your body. So I really appreciated this contribution from her. It's just such a good reminder, you know, when we're feeling overwhelmed or stuck in this work, that doing something can help move that. She also shares that climate grief or solastalgia is a psychological trauma. So climate grief is a psychological trauma. It's a trauma occurs when you're not able to mitigate or cope with what's happening with the stress, right? And so healing then requires the reconstruction of systems based upon empowerment and restoration of relationships. And she talked about how traditional migration stories recount difficult situations that could have been stories of historical trauma. However, they're stories of resilience because they're based on sovereignty, right? So taking back our story and healing through the process of being a good relative, a real human being. And again, I found this really, really important in this work, and just so much wisdom in this. And I was at a language conference last week where the presenter talked about stories and what our stories, what are the stories that we have, or the stories that we're telling ourselves in regards to language revitalization work, right? Is our story about language loss and death in the last couple hundred years? Is that our story? Or is our story that we have 10,000 plus years of speaking our language and living in our language community and culture? Then for a short period of time, we didn't speak our language, right? Or practice our culture to keep our children safe from the trauma inflicted through colonization. And then we took back our power and stepped into being our whole selves and started speaking and practicing our language and cultures again. And our story goes on for another 10,000 plus years. So that's a different story, right? With a different energy. And to me, that's what she's talking about, like really looking back and recognizing what is our story of strength, right? And to me, this is empowerment and restoration of relationship. So Mita also highlights that our strength is when we are in connection to community through caring for each other and through stewardship of land. So anyway, we were super grateful to have Mita with us, and she actually created a short 16-minute video of some of these going into more depth in some of these concepts that she's talked about. If you have a chance to hear her in other places, she's pretty amazing to know and to learn from. And so I just leave it at that. We're super grateful to have Mita with us. And with that, I'll actually hand it back to Megan and Melinda. Dobitin.
Thank you, Laverne. It's funny, I spent a lot of time kind of going through a lot of the content and the material for the report, but it's definitely much better to hear you both breathe life kind of like into this information. It's really awesome. And yeah, and Mita's presentation will be online on the Learning Network website very soon. So for this slide, and for anybody listening on the phone, it's the climate projections, the science is significant slide. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what Jeremy Liddell shared in his presentation. And he gave some projections for changing conditions in Alaska and the Arctic, and specifically a bit of information on changing temperature, precipitation, snow seasons, permafrost thaws, sea ice extent, coastal flooding, and erosion, a lot of which Shasta was talking about, I think, in the beginning. And actually in this picture over on the left here, he's presenting on the changing snowfall in Alaska. And these speech bubbles on the right list a few of the comments we received from participants about why they felt hearing the science was significant and important in this training. And I really want to emphasize here, even before I start reading them, that this was just a few of the comments that we received. We got a lot of really positive feedback where people talked about how much they really enjoyed hearing from Jeremy's presentation. Kind of specifically, somebody mentioned being able to take the knowledge back to their community to share, like these specific projections. And they really appreciated how he brought science to discussion and having resources to draw from and access to people like Jeremy. especially in working through their adaptation planning. And a few of the other participants expressed how really impactful it was to see and hear kind of what they're seeing in their own communities with regards to climate change. And this last one, which I really love, it was great to have someone present climate science in a way that was accessible to us. So kind of making that climate science understandable and making it easily able to be communicated, which I thought was really cool. And then Melinda, I want to leave space here for you as well to jump in because I wasn't at the training. So if you have anything to add about those comments or anything else, feel free.
Yeah, we got really positive feedback, and I just wanted to chime in here because I think we run into a range of folks. Some people that say, well, the science is too overwhelming, or perhaps too it's a lot of information to take in, and it is. And at the same time, the ability to think about what is going to come down the pipe, or potentially, come down the pipe, and then to be able to have access to somebody from a Western science background and be able to have that discussion among each other after having talked about the impact. So it is very validating. And so I just want to stress that, our own population, whenever they've heard the climate science and had a chance to have this dialogue around it, has definitely appreciated it. So it has a place in bringing people along and helping to provide space for collective discussion about steps forward. So thanks, Megan.
Yeah, thank you. And I think kind of in that same vein, here's a little bit more of the feedback we received from participants. We invited them to say what they liked, what they didn't like, what we could do better, what we could change, because I think it's really important to make sure that this training is useful to people. Because if it's not useful, what are we doing? So kind of on the training as a whole, these are really just a handful of comments, and I'm just going to touch on a few now. One person specifically mentioned that their key takeaway was using their traditional knowledge as our guide and using it to move forward into the space. And another person mentioned how their main takeaway was resilience and that we should be involving the youth. They need to be included in on this planning, including the understanding of science and climate change and how traditional resilience can keep things alive. And then up here on the top right was another comment I really loved that was, rather than just worry about climate change, we can take action through climate planning, be proactive and self-determine a vision for the future rather than reactive. And there were a few other comments about kind of the structure of the training itself. So 5 people out of the 15 total participants mentioned having a follow-up training or a third day, and they really expressed a need to have time to digest the information. Because I think we've talked a little bit about before, this work is challenging and it takes a lot to kind of take in, especially if it's something that we've never heard before. So I think just taking the time in the future would be really helpful for a lot of the people in the evaluation. And a few other things, people mentioned they wanted a little bit more time to do deep dives into the activities. Because I think when you're covering so much information, you can really only scratch the surface, but there is really a need for people to have more in-depth kind of interaction and hear from the other participants and other communities around Alaska and the Arctic. And I also want to really quickly add that we did hold this training in August, which I know is a really difficult time for people as well. So that's also why we're doing another training in the spring, this training summary in spring, to kind of give a little bit more information to people that weren't able to attend the one last summer. So, and with that, I'll hand it back to Melinda.
Great. Well, we just wanted to also highlight for those of you who are in the, currently planning or have projects where you're planning or are considering this or continuing with integrating health and particularly wellness, some of the steps that you can take, and maybe some of you are already taking these, but really looking at if you have any existing tribal health or wellness revitalization plans, that those plans can be built upon and expanded to address climate issues. You know, many communities often do, cultural camps or cultural wellness or youth camps, and asking how do you expand and mainstream climate issues and take action in this area, because obviously there's a lot of concern. People are experiencing it. The other thing, particularly in the area of helping people process, I think we saw that this summer, at least in my home community and along the Yukon River, thinking about the impacts of low salmon numbers, but talking to community members about their concerns and having local conversations. One of the things that's known in climate communication, in research about climate communication, is the individual conversations that you have with your friends or your family really do help expand the understanding of the impacts of climate and what we're experiencing, and can help people bring people along both in their own personal action and in community action. So those individual conversations are important. Another thing to consider is, where is your traditional knowledge? I know many communities and organizations are really active in revitalization efforts. And, we have a much fragmented experience in many realms as Alaska Native people. Our governance system has changed, our education has changed, the management of our fish and wildlife. We have a very fragmented system, and our contact history in each community is different. And so you may have information that is in the school, at your regional corporation, at your village corporation, in any kind of historical or recently published books. If you look at this places to seek where traditional knowledge may be, this was actually pulled together during the building resilience training by community members. So our knowledge may be in a lot of different places, and how do we continue to pull that together and look for strategies to respond to traditionally and to validate ourselves. And then the other thing is to connect with other tribes and partner organizations, such as Paula Indian Tribe, as we did to partner in this case, or other regions that are making headway. I know Aleutian Pribilof Island has done a great deal of stuff in language revitalization, and so the organizations that are really making headway in areas of looking to our own belief system and our own knowledge as a source of resilience, and then being very deliberate about how does that go into planning. And then of course other places that focus on climate information or climate action. So next slide. And then there's many resources out here. You heard Shasta mention that Paula Indian Tribe has done quite a bit in terms of vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. These are listed here. We have other tribes like the Swinomish and many others across the lower 48s that looked at how do you integrate addressing health issues, health and well-being issues in their adaptation planning. And then more recently, in the Status of Tribes and Climate Change report, Chapter 5 really speaks to health and well-being. And that's a really accessible report. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's well written, well laid out, and it has key key points that are made in there, and it can be used as a good reference for proposal writing or in your adaptation planning if you need that. So here's some references we really hope you go to visit. Okay. All right, well, we probably, oh, and then we just have some general announcements here. I am not going to go over them fully. You have them here, but I wanted to highlight a couple of them because they're specifically focused on traditional ecological knowledge, and then also some more training that has to do with proposal writing and accessing some resources that maybe could help your community or your tribe with planning. There will be a forthcoming larger report. We just started trying to finalize that. That will highlight more of the exercises and the information that went along in this training that we had. So with that, I would like to say thank you and then just open it up. We did have some folks here that joined us that participated in this training. Chris and Brenda and Adelaide, and I think I might have missed one too. But please, if you want to give your thoughts, either in the chat or open it up, or your comments, we'll just maybe the easiest thing to do is if you're online to raise your hand. I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand. Well, does anybody have any questions or comments? Well, I'm just going to ask Chris or Adelaide and Brenda, do you guys have any comments that you want to add? Oh, the comments are coming in the chat. So Brenda said it was a very emotional session, but all in all, a great session. Oh, the TRLN address, there we go. Molly put that up for you, Karen. And then also, I see Adelaide said she appreciated being included, and that was a good job on the report. I guess I'd like to hear, maybe I should ask a question. If anybody online has looked at how to integrate traditional practices in their adaptation planning. Is anybody doing that deliberately right now? For those of you who are on the call here, the webinar? Well, pretty quiet group today. I'll open it up to anybody that in terms of our planning team, or Shasta or Laverne, if you want to add anything.
Well, it looks like Jennifer unmuted herself, so maybe she wants to speak.
Hey, I love the session. I am including, I know this is not IGAP, but I did include traditional foods in our IGAP program for our next fiscal year, because in Bristol Bay, our king salmon returns are becoming more of a concern, first with size and now with numbers. And that's something we're going to start looking at. We hadn't really talked about traditional anything other than what our riverbanks looked like before and what they're looking like now. So we're gonna start moving into a little bit more traditional stuff. So this was really helpful in connecting the environmental with the traditional. So thank you.
So good, and thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I think that's very critical to make space for that. Yeah.
daylight savings time.
Oh, I'm like, what are you talking about? DST, I'm living acronyms. I was thinking of something science.
You know, though,
Well,
it's interesting to bring that up, Freddie, because you may have heard that the Senate passed a bill to make daylight saving time permanent, and now it has to go through the House. And if the president signs it, then we'll be in permanent daylight saving time. But from a health standpoint, the sleep experts say that standard time is actually better for your health. And I have to say, I thought of my friends in Alaska when one of the senators complained that on standard time, the sun goes down at 4:15 p.m. in Maine. And I thought, oh, why don't you go to Alaska, pal?
well, on that note, if we don't have any other comments, I just encourage you. I know that Shasta has a lot going on in this area. She does offer a lot of workshops and input and perspective on a national front, and her tribe continues to build capacity out in this area. So she's a resource. Laverne is also an excellent resource, and she is going to continue to support adaptation planning and training, in addition to all the other wonderful things she does in terms of both language revitalization and working in the university system to support our students. But I thank you all for those of you who attended today, and please watch the learning website for the fuller report. And if you have any questions, definitely reach out, and know that the Learning Network is here to support work in this area. So Hajrigadistan, thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon, springtime afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Great
And
great
thank you.
presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
All right, you too, take care.